I'll say this. Bring on the Commanders. The remainder of the NFL playoff bracket is set. The Lions, obviously, with the 1 seed, will play the lowest remaining seed. And as of the time of this recording, that is settled. That team will be the Washington Commanders. We are going to spend a lot of time talking about and previewing that game as the Lions begin their trek, hopefully, to their first ever Super Bowl. Welcome into the show. I'm Chris Castellani. If you're watching this or listening to this on Tuesday and saying to yourself, hey, wait a minute, wait a minute. This is usually a Monday show. I wanted to wait and see who the Lions were going to be playing. Now, obviously, the Washington-Tampa Bay game, which was a wonderful game, ended pretty late on Sunday. And we've had multiple instances. And hey, this is the sacrifice that you make when you have a good team. We've had multiple instances of the Lions having Sunday night games or Monday games where I send the recording to Austin and he's up for all hours of the night. I figured it would just be best to record this on Monday morning or Monday afternoon so that he has plenty of time to work on this. If I'm kind of struggling to speak right now, it's because my face is a little bit cold. I just got back from outside where I was shoveling. This is obviously a sports show and I'm a Michigander. You would think, as somebody who's nearing the age of 30, that this type of weather, and we've seen way worse than this, would be something I get used to. Man, this time of year, I'm glad I do this show. I'm glad I create content, and I'm glad that sports exists. This time of year just blows. I don't know, dude. It is unbelievable to me that people can walk around with smiles on their faces sometimes. Credit to them. Hey, you're living a good life. But man, this is just, the entire color palette is gray. You walk outside, it's 10 degrees. It feels like you're getting punched in the face. We need that escape, and that escape, thankfully, has been sports. And as I said earlier, the Lions are going to be playing the Washington Commanders. Of course, I like the way the NFL does it. The number 1 seed, which in this case is the 15-2 Lions, are guaranteed to play the lowest seeded team in the divisional round. It's not always like that. It's not like that in baseball. It's not like that in college football with the playoffs. So things could have gotten a little bit wonky, but the Lions will be playing the Washington Commanders. Now, be careful what you wish for here. And this is a take that could obviously be dug up and thrown in my face like a chimp's fecal matter. But at the same time, of all the teams that I would have wanted to play in the postseason, in the divisional round at least, I think that this is the optimal outcome for the Lions. Now, that's not to say that Washington is by any means a bad team. In fact, at this point in the year, it's why usually when it comes to the postseason, I kind of don't like it when people are like, oh, I hope this team wins because it's easier for us. I feel like when you're playing in a very exclusive group, which is what the playoffs should be, the best of the best, you're going to play anyone who's good. And, to me, there's no such thing as an easy path in this day and age. You could trip up against anyone. You got to bring your A game against everyone. And that's going to have to be the case for the Lions on Saturday. They are going to be playing Saturday night, 8 p.m. night game at Ford Field. You know that it's going to be rocking. Look, Washington has had a marvelous comeback season. And it's very weird. And I don't mean to turn this into a diatribe about Washington football history. But when you think of like the history of the NFL, especially the early history of the Super Bowl era, Washington had a lot of great teams. I mean, they won multiple Super Bowls. I think they're very impressive. I think they won 3 Super Bowls with 3 different quarterbacks when Joe Gibbs was their coach. I mean, a lot of great players, a lot of great teams, and yet they have been marred by controversy and really just ineptitude over the last, I don't know, however long it was, 2 decades, really, with Dan Snyder being their owner. He's since sold the team, and that's really all it took. First year after he sells the team, Jane Daniels is drafted number 2 overall. They bring in Dan Quinn. They've had a 12-5 season. They won a playoff game for the first time in 17 years. It's really been a remarkable campaign, and I think when you break down this matchup, what a lot of people are going to point to is the fact that Washington is a team with a rookie quarterback, and people are going to say, hey, that's best case scenario for Detroit. You have a quarterback who's going to have to go on the road again. Now, he went on the road in Tampa Bay, and as good as Tampa Bay is, going on the road in Tampa Bay, it ain't Detroit, I'm telling you. Going on the road against the 1-seeded team in the Lions, potentially an opportunity for him to struggle. He hasn't seen an environment like this. That part of it I push back against, because not all rookie quarterbacks are created equal. Jaden Daniels last night, I mean, I don't think it seemed like he didn't have a pulse against Tampa Bay. I mean, just cool, calm, collected the entire time. This is a guy who comes from the SEC, and I remember a few years ago Joe Burrow made a comment before the Super Bowl where he's like, I'm not really worried about some of these hostile environments because I played in the SEC and those places can get crazy. And for some reason that comment picked up some controversy, but it's the truth. Like in the NFL, if you go to a difficult environment and lose, it could ruin your week. If in the SEC you go to a difficult environment and you lose, like you could die. I mean, okay, I'm obviously exaggerating there, but you get my point. Pressure's high. Jayden Daniels played his last 2 years at LSU in Baton Rouge in high pressure environments. I don't think that's going to be the big concern. I don't see him coming out and laying an egg like Justin Herbert did on Saturday against the Texans. Where I think this game will be won and where I have a lot of confidence in the Lions here. And of course, look, I could come on here and say, if this happens, this happens, this happens. Yes. If Jared Goff throws 5 picks and Jake Bates misses 3 field goals, the Lions are probably going to lose. I'm willing to believe that the version of the Lions that we've seen through 17 games is going to fall in line with the version that we see on Saturday. And if that's the case, I really like Detroit's chances. And the reasons for that are not necessarily because I think that they're going to rattle Jayden Daniels. The big reason is the fact that Washington ranks 30th in the NFL in rush defense. And I think one of the truly great qualities about Ben Johnson's offense is the fact that they aren't just your basic finesse explosive offense. Yes, they have the ability to have a one-play 75-yard drive where Gibbs pops off for a long run or Amon-Ra or J-Mo pops off for a long touchdown, but there is a toughness, there is a physicality to these running backs, there's a physicality to this offensive line. It does look like they're going to have David Montgomery back on Saturday. I think the goal will be establish drives early, dominate the line of scrimmage against really they're 30th. I could say it's below subpar, but it's definitely a subpar rush defense. I think that's ultimately going to be where the game is going to be won. I think that's in many ways the identity that Dan Campbell wants to have throughout the playoffs. As much as we like Jared Goff, and Jared's had an unbelievable season, when you look at some of the games that this team has lost, and they haven't lost many over the last few years, often, they fall behind early. The 2 games this year are a prime example of that. Goff threw, I think, 50 passes in the Tampa Bay game and close to that in the Buffalo game. That's not the identity of this team. I think the identity of this team is running the football, is dominating drives, wearing down defenses, and then by the time they're worn down, you pop off for a big play or two. I'm going to like the Lions in this game, and look, Washington's had a tremendous year, but when we see this in the playoffs every single season, last year it was the Texans. There's always that one team who has overachieved. And don't get me wrong, this is the best season by a Washington football team in 20 plus years. I mean, at least it probably going back to the 90s at this point, really. At the same time, there's always that one team that has overachieved like crazy that you can tell is probably 1 year away from really being a contender. Now, you got to be careful or else you could slip up. Detroit's going to have to bring it. But I like the Lions' chances in this game. Obviously, we'll see how things play out over the next a few weeks here in terms of who their opponent would be in the NFC Championship. You don't want to look too far ahead, but it would take a dud for the Lions to lose this game. I can't say that against the Eagles or Chiefs in the Super Bowl or Bills, where you're playing teams that have, maybe you're a little bit better than, maybe you're a little bit worse than, probably evenly matched. That they are a better team than the Washington Commanders. They have been all year. And as brilliant as Jayden Daniels has been and as remarkable of a season as they have had a lot of narrow victories. I mean, Daniels has had 5 or 6 game-winning drives late in the fourth quarter of games. There's been a lot of toss-up games that they've won, and hey, it's kind of like run differential in baseball. You could have a whatever run differential. What matters is that you're winning games. The point I'm trying to make is, as fun as they've been, and as good as I think they're going to be, I mean, you have a franchise quarterback. I don't know if they're necessarily as good as their record, and hopefully the Lions show that on Saturday when they can effectively run the ball. The crowd's going to be into the game like crazy. And even, look, it's not even meant to be a knock on Jayden Daniels, but we saw it last year in the postseason with Stafford. We saw it last year in the postseason with Baker Mayfield when they came to Ford Field. Like, this environment can get to teams. It can get to quarterbacks. You're going to see those false start penalties. You're going to see those delay of game penalties. Assuming, of course, we have an officiating crew that actually likes to call those, which in modern age of the NFL, sometimes they don't. But I think the spread is open to 8.5 for Detroit on some sports books. I haven't really been a betting man much this year, but I would probably take them to cover. I like their chances here. From the jump, and really going back to that Green Bay game 2 years ago, the one thing I've said is, with every step, win or loss, we have to live under the assumption that this is different. And if this was still the Lions teams of the past, regardless of record, I would probably be coming into this game saying, oh God, please don't slip up. Please don't slip up. Please don't slip up. I've seen so much over these last 3 seasons that have gotten me to believe, I mean, the biggest cynic amongst us to believe, I think they take care of Washington, and then it comes down to a showdown with. I mean, we'll see who they play. One of the wild card games, as of the time of this recording, hasn't even been played yet between the Vikings and Rams. I want to talk a little bit of college hoops, and I have some concern just internally because I don't want every hoop segment that I do about Michigan and Michigan State to get repetitive, where I like the format that we have throughout the season during football season. There's a game, you talk about the game, you dissect the game. That's a segment every single week on the show. If you've been following from the beginning, you know that formula. I mean, at least in my opinion, it works, but we've been consistent with it. Whereas I feel like with every week, it's just kind of a check-in with these 2 programs, and it's probably a good thing. I mean, it is a good thing to say that I don't have much else to say beyond what I've already said, other than I remain remarkably impressed with where these 2 programs are at. And I think both of them are well ahead of the game in terms of where I expected they would be. And I'll start with Michigan. They had a tremendous week. You go to UCLA, who I think is trending downwards. You had Mick Cronin, who threw a little tantrum after Michigan dominated them last week and then got ejected from a game against Maryland, another game they lost over the weekend. But Michigan goes to UCLA. Big Ten basketball, it is a greater stressor to me than Big Ten football. Because let's be honest, and part of this is I have the privilege of rooting for a program that's typically very good and sometimes even great, transcendent, like they were in 2023. But I don't sweat out a lot of games during football season against Rutgers. I just don't. I don't sweat out a lot of games against some of the lower level teams in the Big Ten, right? In college basketball, man, any one of these teams can beat you. If I see it's a road game, I almost don't even look at the opponent. I say this is a losable game. Now, obviously, it's a winnable game too. And UCLA, came in struggling. They had lost to Nebraska the previous game, but Michigan played probably the ultimate Michigan or 2025 Michigan basketball experience against UCLA, where they had a massive lead, lost said massive lead, and then finished with a massive lead. I mean, it was a very impressive victory. And then they came back home and took care of Washington in what was a game that was comfortably a double-digit lead for a majority of the second half. More importantly, in the second half of that game, and really throughout the game against Washington, I thought the pace was really good, and I felt like they limited the turnovers. And then on the other side, because I do want to connect these teams here, Michigan State looks excellent. And I've tried to think of what the comparison is, how I can define this Michigan State team, because unlike with baseball, where I can come on here and say what's working with a pitcher and what's working with a hitter and break down defense and analytics, like basketball is much more of an eye test thing for me. And I think especially when you're talking about college basketball, where coaching is so important and team chemistry is so important, when I look at this version of Tom Izzo's squad, am I seeing one that is doing anything drastically different in terms of what they want their identity to be? No, not necessarily. It's not like the year that, this is not meant to be a knock on Izzo, but it's not like the year where Beeline completely fixed his offense. I mean, you went from a team that almost exclusively shot 3-pointers to a team that was, creating a dribble penetration. They had tremendous point guards. There was the year when all of a sudden they just became a top 10 defensive team. They haven't done an entire 180 like that. At the same time, the comparison I can make is I feel like following 2019, it's like somebody bought a new computer. And in 2019, you're looking at that computer going, man, this is a really cool computer. There's a lot of features, like high tech, good internet speed. And then you get 3, 4, 5 years later and you say, look, this thing still works. It's still functional. You could still check your emails. You could still go to Twitter. You could still upload videos. All that's great, but it's just not up to par with the caliber of computer that exists in 2024, 2025. Well, MSU has upgraded. I just feel like the way this team plays, the depth that they have, and I know that the rotations can bother people with Izzo sometimes, but I think the big advantage that this Michigan State team has that I think that they've lacked over the last several years is depth. I mean, you had, I think, 10 or 11 guys that scored against Northwestern on Saturday. In Northwestern, a team that, Boo-Booey was a reason for this, but a team that's given you a lot of trouble over the last several seasons. And MSU did everything you need to do on the road against a team like that. They took the crowd out of the game early. They dominated early. That thing was 10 to 15 points for 35 minutes of a 40-minute game. I thought it was a tremendous performance. And right now, and the reason I want to kind of bring this back around and connect these teams, it's kind of like the Force diag between Kylo Ren and Rey in the Star Wars sequels. It's like one of the only good things about that movie, or those movies. I can't believe I'm saying this in January, and I could end up, looking like a horse's ass, which I have a tendency to look like. The final regular season game of the season, Michigan goes to Michigan State to play at Breslin Center. I believe it's a Sunday game. Usually it is. Somebody, this is me calling my shot here. Somebody, potentially even both those teams, are going to be playing for a chance to win the Big Ten in that game. I think when you look at where these teams are at right now, Michigan's schedule, well, you got to end up playing everybody, and you're always going to play tough games. It's not like football where a team might get rewarded and, hey, we don't have to play Penn State. We don't have to play Oregon. You're going to play everybody. But I think with where Michigan's at, guys, they're 5-0 in the Big Ten. That cannot be ignored right now. And they've had a few pretty darn tough games. I would argue every game in the Big Ten is relatively tough. But just kind of breaking it down, I'm just going to say, I could be very wrong, 15-5 wins you at least a share of the conference. That means Michigan's got to go 10-5 in the rest of their conference games. It's doable, guys. I mean, like that's and look, they're going to have their tough stretch, and Michigan State's going to have their tough stretch. And of course, MSU's been every bit as brilliant in conference play as well. But this is very cool to see, because I expected that this would be a fun year of basketball in this state because both these teams had the potential to surprise us. We've gone beyond the point of surprise. Like the initial shock of, hey, this team's good. They're probably going to be better than I expected. Like, I'm not thinking about that anymore. Like, I stopped thinking about that after like the second game of the year when I saw what Danny Wolf was able to do and I saw what some of these guys in Michigan were able to do. And obviously the way Michigan State's been playing, I kind of came to terms with the fact, okay, they're going to exceed expectations. But right now, I'm looking at two teams that have potential to make deep runs in March. Now, March is as cruel a postseason as there is because you play 5 minutes of basketball that suck against a team that's hot one day. You can get knocked out in the first round, but the ceiling for both of these teams is incredibly high. And, well, maybe you could look at some of the schedule in the Big Ten and say, oh, this was a relatively easy game, or this one fell in line, or this team isn't as good as we think. You know what? I have been watching Big Ten basketball long enough to know that whether it's at home or on the road, you can slip up against anybody. I mean, Illinois, people were acting like was the toast of the town, and Brad Underwood does a wonderful job there. Just played at home against USC. Sorry, I was about to say UCF. Like, give it a few more years, UCF will probably come to the Big Ten too, against USC and lost by double digits. A team that Michigan went on the road and beat. Both of these programs find themselves in very good standing. They're going to be jockeying for position all year. I'm starting to get, we're not quite there yet. I'm starting to get like those like Beeline era vibes where it's like, man, the two best programs in the Big Ten, they might just be in the state of Michigan. And I think it's fun to see. It's good to see, because I really do feel like some of the air was let out of the balloon over the last few years. But I feel like Izzo's teams, not so much Izzo, because I've never gotten the impression, and I've seen people throw this out there, I've never gotten the impression that Izzo's like losing it in regards to passion for the game, and you see that with coaches sometimes. We've even had a few coaches admit to that. Jim Larinaga a few weeks ago retired, just openly admitting, like, I don't think I can coach in this like age of college basketball right now. I've never gotten that impression with Izzo. I think that they've just had a few teams that weren't as great, but it seems like the holes that they've had over the last several years have been plugged. You have really good scores. You have an automatic bucket in Jay Nakins, and I think the guard play is as quietly efficient as there is in the country right now, where I don't think that, at least for this version of Michigan State basketball, I don't think the slasher 15-point-a-game point guard exists. But every time I look at Fears or Holloman and I look at their final box score, it's them playing really efficient floor games. I think they run the offense the way that Izzo wants them to run the offense. It's a fun team right now. You're kind of getting those flashbacks to some great Izzo teams of the past. And for Michigan, you're not really getting flashbacks to anything because this is year one of Dusty May. And when you look at the stuff that's coming out, that and look, it's the social media team is going to post stuff that's going to promote the team, but it seems like he is doing a tremendous job of getting everyone to buy in. And I didn't have any fear of that from the beginning, but there is a fear of, hey, these guys haven't played together. How are they going to look? Outside of the turnover issues, which at points are a little bit overblown, this is a really good team. I mean, they're a fun team to watch, and they can beat you in different ways. Against UCLA, they were making every 3-pointer that they were attempting practically. Against Washington, they were slashing. They have the highest 2-point field goal percentage in the country. Michigan State. Keep an eye out on basketball. Thank God, dude, because really, I mean, after the Lions are done, that's about a month and a half of nothing if neither one of these basketball teams was carrying their weight. So thank God we are going to be watching interesting college basketball for the next several months. I'm very confident in that. Excited to see what the next step is. Okay, one thing I want to address, two more things, actually. Number one is the Tigers, and there's not a whole lot of news to report with the Bregman stuff. I don't have any comment on it because, like I said, we're not hearing news. The one thing I will say is I wish Major League Baseball would do something about this. And by this, I mean the agony that is the long-ass free agency period. You guys know that I've been very critical of the NBA, and in terms of the on-court product, I think that there's a lot of frustration in terms and just general boredom when I watch an NBA game. At the same time, one thing the NBA does right is that free agency is a window. It's not something where it starts November 1st and then you can sign a day before opening day. Now, I don't know if this is something the players have to sign off on or anything like that, but I love when the stove is hot. The problem is the stove is only hot like sporadically twice a month. And really, I mean, because you'll get like Soto signed, like, oh, now all the dominoes are going to fall, and they haven't. There's still a lot of free agents that are still in the market. And 2 months ago, I know I've made this reference before. 2 months ago, we were hearing about how the Red Sox, Blue Jays, and Tigers were the favorites for Bregman. Well, what the fuck? I'm sorry, but what are you doing then? Then you should be talking, negotiating every single day. The process of it, regardless of whether the Tigers get Bregman or not, I find to be agonizing. And I don't think from a consumerism standpoint, it's really great either. I think it would be really cool if we had something similar. Now, I don't want another lockout, but something similar to the situation we had when the lockout was about to go down after the 2021 season, where you had about a week where everyone knew the game was shutting down. So a bunch of guys signed contracts, and we got like 4 or 5 big-time contracts in a matter of like 2 or 3 days. I would love for Major League Baseball to make some sort of fix, because I hate coming on here and saying I got nothing. And that's because we got nothing. We're not getting any news. Just, it'll be worth it if they sign the guy. But oy vey. Okay, well, actually, I wanted to throw in one more thing here. Detroit sports aren't losing right now. Like the Wings and the Pistons. The Wings, I'd gotten the impression, hadn't won a game all year, and all of a sudden they're 2 points behind in terms of a playoff spot. Like the last thing I'm going to do is come down and just come on here and break down hockey. Like I think that would be disingenuous as somebody who knows the least about hockey of any sport that he's watched. The one thing I just want to say about the Pistons and the very weird relationship I have with the NBA and kind of strange relationship I have with the Pistons is, from what I've watched, and I'm not going to blow smoke and act like I've seen every game, the difference in terms of competitiveness, but even more so, and this might sound like a backhanded compliment, but it's really not, basic fundamentals and floor spacing that I've seen from this Pistons team compared to what we saw from Monty Williams' group last year, it is night and day. And it seems like the one thing that they needed to happen is Cade Cunningham is emerging as a superstar. And it took a minute. And even I, as somebody who's kind of a novice about this stuff, was like, are we sure about the extension? Like, are we sure he's that great? And I think ultimately we talk about it with the NFL as well, but you are a product of your situation and you're a product of your system. And the fact is, when you look at the first 3 seasons of Cade Cunningham, year 1 was a successful rookie campaign. Year 2 was wiped out because of injury. In year 3, they had like the shittiest team ever. I mean, there wasn't a bigger mess in sports last year than the Detroit Pistons. So in a lot of ways, like 2 of his 3 seasons are kind of a wash. I think this is the true emergence of, as Tim Hardaway Jr. put it, one of the best guards in the NBA right now. It looks like he's going to make the All-Star team. And yeah, it seems as though Bickerstaff is doing a very good job. It seems as though Bickerstaff is starting to turn the culture around there. They did the thing that everyone told them to do, which is they had to clean house. They had to start from scratch. I'm not going to call it the honeymoon period because they haven't won a playoff game in 17 years, but I will say that you have to give them time to develop this. And I think for year one, I don't know of any Pistons fan who isn't excited about the fact that there's been a real upward trajectory. And I look, as negative as I am about the NBA, I don't want bad things to happen to the Pistons. I hope they win. I hope they're successful. I want to see that place rocking for playoff games. Like, it's something I wrote in a manic state a year ago just is meaningless. Like, I hope the best for them. One more thing, and this is not so much Michigan related, it's more Michigan adjacent. Ohio State's playing for the national championship. And again, I could be wrong. Ohio State's probably going to win the national championship against Notre Dame. Now, I'm very conflicted about this because the fact is anything I say about college football at this point will probably be viewed as sour grapes because I am a Michigan fan, and Michigan's biggest rival, who Ohio State lost to, is likely going to win the national championship at this point. Look, if Ohio State wins the national championship, does it remove anything about the last 3 years of Michigan football, the 40-3 run, the 3 Big Ten titles, the national championship? Absolutely freaking not. And people who view things through that lens, I feel like, are very bizarre. Did you think Ohio State was just going to go away and never be good in football again? Like, to me, what happens one year doesn't carry over to the next season. Those memories are there. Those victories are there. It was magic. And even this year they beat Ohio State. So, I mean, that was magic. So I don't view it like, oh, we only had 1 year to celebrate it. Let me tell you something, dude. I've only had one team win a championship like this in my lifetime. You will never hear the end of that 2023 run from me. Like, I will be insufferable with how much I bring up that team because they won a championship. Like, that's how I roll. I got one. I don't know when the honeymoon period's going to end, when that sheen is going to wear off. But right now, regardless of whatever Ohio State does against Notre Dame, I don't view it as a lie or some sort of huge negative that's a 2-loss Ohio State team won the national championship the next season. The one thing I will say, and I've been very consistent with this, I've never been that big on the 12-team playoff. I was always fine with 4, and I'll do a longer segment about this at some point in the future. But my whole thing was, when you look back at the BCS era and why it made people so angry, it's that typically there was somewhere between 1 and 3 teams that didn't play for the national championship that you felt like should have had a shot at playing for the national championship. How they've turned that into 12 is crazy to me. Like, I'm sorry. In college football, every year in college football, there are not 12 teams that are good enough to be playing for a national championship. There's not. And that's why they're going to ruin the NCAA tournament with this too, because they're going to go to 128 at some point. And just because one 25 seed is going to go on a run 1 year, it's going to somehow validate it. It's like, no, that many teams should not have the right or the privilege to play for a national championship. They just couldn't. The big problem I have is that I think the current 12-team system, which is a lot of teams, I think rewards failure, in my opinion. If you pulled any Ohio State fan aside after the loss to Michigan and asked them, is this season a success or failure? Every one of them, 100%, unanimously would say failure. And now they're probably going to win the national championship. And it doesn't take away anything from what they've accomplished. You hang the banner. They went through a gauntlet of really good teams to get there. I just need to accept, and it's not even a criticism of the system, or it's more of a criticism of me. I need to accept that the college football era that I grew up in, that I loved, that I would argue is much better than the one we're in now, that it's just different. That, I came from an age where if you lost to Ohio State, your season's derailed, dude. You don't get another opportunity to get back on the horse and try to win a national championship. In 16, Michigan was 10-1. They lost to Ohio State, didn't make the playoff. In 18, Michigan was 10-1. They lost to Ohio State, got mauled by Ohio State, didn't make the playoff. In the current age of college football, both of those teams would have had an opportunity to compete for a national championship in the 12 team. So, I think it devalues the regular season, but I don't even want to go down that road, because if it was any other team, people would listen to this argument because it is Ohio State playing for a championship. I people are going to kind of raise one eyebrow at it. And I get it. And if they win it, good for them. I mean, they've had to go through, a really tough stretch. It does. That's the one thing I'll say. The teams that win it in the 12-team era, they will have earned it, because you are going to be having to go through 3 tough opponents. That's why even when people complain about schedule, like, these things work themselves out. You're going to end up playing really good teams down the stretch regardless. So, yeah, something to look for. Wednesday. I think that game's next Monday. I think we can finally get the college football season over with. Jesus, January 20th. All right. Yeah, that pretty short show today, I guess. That'll probably do it. Real quick, if you want to follow all the content that we do, you can go to castellanicontent.com. If you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, like, subscribe, rate, review us. Same on YouTube. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Austin and I are going to work out some plans for what we're going to do on Saturday. I don't know if we have the financial capability of being able to afford to go to these games. So we want to be in Detroit. We want to have boots on the ground. We want to try to do a vlog like we did last season. Hopefully the weather is a little bit nicer than the -5-degree wind chill that it was a year ago, but maybe that's wishful thinking or wishful hoping on my part. As always, appreciate you guys and the way that you continue to lift us up. Yeah, I mean, no diatribes. I'm not going to repeat the same crap that I always repeat. We're just going to keep pounding the pavement and hopefully putting out good stuff that people are responsive to. I thought the reception to the to the Stephen Izzo interview was really nice. I got a lot of texts, a lot of messages about it. He was great. And one of the things, I'm not going to pat myself on the back for doing like a basic thing. One of the things that I'm proudest of in terms of what we've done both prior to Chris and company and since we started that show is that, I make no qualms or make no bones about what's the phrase? I always get that wrong. Whatever. People know I'm a Michigan fan. I wear it on my sleeve. You see the quarter zip that I'm rocking. You see the Trey Burke photo in the background. I'm very proud of the fact that I can be a fan of one team and still maintain good relations with people at Michigan State, and that I can have great respect for them and that they could have great respect, hopefully, for what I do. I think that absolutely helps us grow our audience. In a lot of ways, I would argue it's like, and this is way too complimentary. It's kind of like good for humanity. Like, life's too short. All right, whatever. Love you guys to death. Talk to you real soon. Follow me on Twitter at Castellani2014. Have a good rest of your day. Peace and happiness.